Hello, ni hao. We are in Greece. We are in the island of Rhodos in the Aegean. We are at the crossroad of three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. I'm Fάνης Papathanasίου from the Greek public television ERT, and today on this co-production with China's television CGTN, we'll present a special edition for Greece, China, but also we will talk about the challenges for peace and stability globally. At this point, let me introduce my co-host today, my colleague from CGTN, she came from China, Liu Xin. Ni hao, Xin.
Yasu, Fanny. Yasu to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here on the island of Rhodes for the very first time and for a very special occasion. Let me quote a Greek philosopher, Socrates. I believe he said this: an unexamined life is not worth living. So let us examine the life of the world order as we speak, and let's do it in an inter-civilizational manner. I mean, Greek, European, Chinese, Jewish, and Russian is not everything, but a fair amount and an interesting mix you don't see very often on international TV.
It's very exciting. Let's move and let's present our guests.
Okay. Introduce our distinguished panelists.
Yes, let's start with Mr. Ehούντ Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel. Welcome, Mr. Olmert.
Thank you very much.
And next to him is Dr. Vladimir Gιακούνιν. He's the chairman of the supervisory board of DOC, Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute. Welcome, Mr. Gιακούνιν.
Thank you.
Very glad to have you here.
Yeah. And to his left is Mr. Georgios Katrougalos, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece. Welcome. And to his left is Professor Justin Ifulin, a senior economist and former senior vice president of the World Bank. Welcome.
Welcome to all of you. We're going to talk about different issues about world order, peace and stability. We are in the region where a lot of civilization coexisted with tension and war. Not far from here, in Africa and the Middle East, there is still war and tension. I want you, each one of you, all of you, a short comment first. We're going to go deeply afterwards. What do you think is the #1 threat for peace and stability, according to you? Is it the war in Syria? Is it the Iran nuclear program?
What keeps
Let's start
you
with
awake?
you, Mr. Olmert.
Yeah.
I think all of it together. I think the lack of understanding about the division of power amongst the superpowers of the world. It's changed in the recent past, certainly in the history. There was a clear understanding of who is what, who is the international policeman, who is the partner of the international policeman. Now it seems to somehow shake.
So the lack of who is the boss?
The lack of discipline amongst the superpowers is a source for potential instability that will find its expressions in different parts of the world. And I hope that the superpowers will soon come to an understanding about their respective positions in the international community.
Dr. Gιακούνιν, your answer.
After Second World War, the order was established, and that gave the legality to the balance of powers and correlations of interest, despite the fact that the world was divided, two-polar world. But with the salvation of the Soviet Union, one of the pillars disappeared. So the entire construction of the world order and the international law somehow cracked, if I may say so. And I hope that the Prime Minister will agree with me here. That caused a lot of problems. Besides the new problems, new crises, new challenges which mankind is facing now, like inequality, like technical progress, and like terrorism, and many other issues.
I see.
Mr. Katrougalos, on this, do you think, like Mr. Olmert suggested, that the international system needs a policeman? And who is the boss today?
Well, I think, and this is not the meaning of what Dr. Gιακούνιν said, that we need a policeman. Quite the opposite. We are now in a multipolar world. The obvious destabilizing factor is not the existence of two camps, but the weakening of multilateralism. Saying that, I don't think that we should idealize the status quo ante before the current American administration. The International World Order was not neither fair nor equitable. Look at the Security Council. Africa is missing. South America is missing. India is missing. And look also at the imbalance of interests regarding inequality. According to my perspective, my personal perspective, in the long term, what we should tackle is exactly this imbalance of interests, and especially the inequalities, and more specifically within our part of the world, the West, because there is that we have now an explosion of inequalities unprecedented.
And Professor Lin, from an economist point of view, what is the biggest concern for you in today's world order?
I think the most important concerns are poverty, nationalism, and hegemony. And they are related. Because when a country is poor, then they may cause some kind of issue of social political stabilities. And when a country turns into the nationalism, very often they try to do some policy which seemingly good for their nation, but at the cost of other nations. And then when you have hegemonies, sometimes the country want to maintain the power and deprive the opportunity for other countries to grow, to have development. And I think those three things are the threats to the world's stability and security.
So poverty, nationalism, and hegemony indeed are very big concepts, very big problems. But shall we break down the world and try to look at some hotspots so that we have a better understanding of the world we are living in, or maybe try to understand the situation better? Shall we start?
Let's start with China.
With China, okay. Since we're here in Greece and I'm Chinese, we are on Chinese TV. So shall I start with Minister Katrougalos? What is the status quo of Greek relations with China? I understand that Greece just signed a memorandum of understanding on the Belt and Road Initiative with China. So how do the Greek government and do the Greek people look at relations with China?
We consider China a strategic partner. First of all, we have an immense respect towards the Chinese civilization, being ourselves an ancient civilization. Besides that, our characteristic of our foreign policy is its multidimensionality. We are, of course, in the European Union. Our home is the European Union. But we want to become a country moderator, bridge towards other countries, Russia, the Arab world, China, and especially we want to develop our economic ties with the rising superpower, which is China.
China doesn't call itself a superpower, by the way.
And, that's why I try to use a descriptive term, rising superpower.
Okay, so rising.
It is related to what the professor has said. China has always had a different conception about hegemony and its role. And for this reason, I think it is not contradictory for us to want Europe to have a special political clout and in tandem to work building economic ties with China. I think it's completely in the same line of having a better world.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see the views of Benzin. Professor Lin, what is Greece's strategic importance for China? And could Greece become the bridge between China and the rest of Europe?
I think that China is a rising country. And currently, China is the largest trading nation in the world. China is the second largest economy in the world. And very soon, maybe by the time of 2025, China will be a high-income country. And certainly China need to take more responsibility for the global development. And the Belt and Road Initiative try to provide a vision for the common prosperity in the world. And certainly in Greece and other countries around the Belt and Road, certainly can participate in this opportunity and to address the issue of how to achieve common prosperity for human communities.
So do you see Greece as an important ally, as a gateway, Greece as a gateway to Europe and Africa?
Well, certainly Europe first is a destination. And Europe is also a gateway to Africa and also to America, because we like to have an integrated world. And so we can explore the opportunity together for the development in every country.
Mm-hmm. Prime Minister, let me ask your point of view on China's economic globalization. I mean, Israel is also a very active supporter of the Belt and Road Initiative. It is one of the founding members of the AIIB, the China Infrastructure Investment Bank. How do you look at China's economic globalization and its potential meaning to regional blocs such as the EU?
Well, first of all, I have a personal dimension with regard to China, which is, I guess, different from the other Europeans. My family grew up in China. My parents lived in China, and they grew up in Harbin, which is a major city in China. Yes. So the parts of my family are still there. My grandfather is buried in China, in Harbin. And therefore it has a very special emotional dimension for me. And I was always very anxious in my different capacities in the government to develop the relations between Israel and China, because for me, in a certain way, China was like a second homeland.
So how do you look at Chinese companies going abroad, building railways?
Well, you know, when I was Minister of Industry and Trade, like 16 years ago, I promoted very much the economic cooperation between Israel and China. It was clear that China is emerging as a rising superpower. You don't like the term, but
I don't like the term.
As a rising power, as a rising economic power.
Yes.
And as the professor correctly said, of course, it's the second largest economy, and it will become, maybe in 5 years or 7 years, it will be the first economy in the world. China is anxious to, first of all, I think, to provide quality life for 1.4 billion Chinese.
Absolutely, yes.
And this is the most important challenge for China. And I think that the way to connect with China and to become important for China is to understand what is the priority of the Chinese people as far as they are concerned, and to see how you can become part of this effort. For instance, I remember that the Chinese president, Jiang Zemin, former president, said that his dream is every Chinese child will drink 1 glass of milk, fresh milk, every day.
That goal has been reached quite a while ago, I think.
I started an effort which resulted in building up cow farms with the assistance of the Israeli technologies in China. And there are many, many such farms now in China producing lots of milk and so on. China is a major player in the world economy.
Yes.
And what we try to do in Israel is, as I said, to try and coordinate with the main priorities of China that are synchronized with the needs of China, which is to provide quality life for 1.4 billion people.
Yeah.
Dr. Gιακούνιν, a lot of people in the West, though, they're raising fear about China's growing political influence in Europe, in the Balkans. They see that the Belt and Road Initiative is more than economic dominance. Do you buy this view?
Listen, if we are talking about rank and file's sentiments, those sentiments are growing up because of the, may I say, propaganda which is being distributed through the mass media, through the social networks, etc. If we are talking objectively, it is inevitable that the world is changing. Take the recent report of McKinsey about the developing, emerging economies overcoming the G7 economies. This is the fact. So be objective. If it is the fact, take the fact at the face value and then decide what is your place. But, when that kind of sentiments, listen, Chinese are coming or Russians were coming or something like that, that is, I suppose, a very poor political games, nothing more. Let us look into the substance. China, and I'm not buying the term rising superpower, because, my experience with the Chinese leading people, with Chinese politicians, is showing that, they do understand that, if they accept the idea of rising superpower, then immediately they will be squeezed into very narrow niche of being superpower, being gendarme, being what? Instead, the initiative, One Belt, One Road, as it used to be, and Belt and Road, as you call it now, suggested, equal participation. When China is suggesting to, say, developing country, listen, we can give money, we can provide technology to construct infrastructure. Yeah. But it is for you to decide whether you want it or
Absolutely.
Not. And if you take it, then you take responsibility.
I think that's what Greece did, right? At times of trouble, Chinese investment was here, Chinese help was here, and Greece took it. However, Greece came under quite a bit of pressure from its European neighbors saying China has some kind of political influence on Greece's foreign policy. How do you look at that kind of? Did Greece feel pressure from China to do certain things?
Not at all. I think one of the most distinctive characters of the Chinese investment policy is the lack of any kind of conditionality. And I'm saying that because we have suffered in Greece from other types of conditionality. And exactly because we have to be quite open and quite frank, what I see personally as really problematic in the last decades was exactly the dominance of a neoliberal, what we call usually Washington consensus in the conditionality of what we have offered as West to Africa, for instance. And this is at the roots of the problem of Africa not being now at the same on the same track as Asia or the other rising powers in the earth. So we have explained to our economy, to our European partners, that we do not have objections on their behalf, that we need the Chinese investments in order to go back to growth. And I must tell you that we would not receive any kind of political objections by them.
Yeah. On the other hand, Mr. Katrougalos, there are a lot of European countries like Germany that they support that unless European Union forms a policy against China, Europe will be divided.
No, the divisions in Europe are irrelevant with the Chinese rise. Look, if you look globally, the human history, China was always, if not the number one power, number one or number two. India was the number one industrial power just before the British going there as a colonial power. So it is a good thing that at the global level we have now less imbalanced situation. What is important for Europe, however, is to become unified, to overcome its internal divisions, and have political clout in the world. But it is not in hostility or in opposition with any other country, China or whatever others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would like to ask a question from the Chinese perspective, hearing all the foreign perspectives, Professor Lin. However, China's Belt and Road Initiative, as is turning 5, is the Chinese government and Chinese investors doing some kind of soul-searching as to where to go in the next steps? Are they readjusting their investment strategies? Are they aware of the kind of doubts that Chinese investment are arousing in the recipient countries and regions?
I think I'd like to go back to the question we just discussed. I do notice in the media in the West, sometimes they judge China, but they based on their own experiences. Because in the past, when they entered in one country, in general, they want to grasp, they want to dominate. And now they see that China is coming, and they think, well, China should behave with the same motivation, same intention as we were in the past. But I think the Chinese philosophy is somewhat different. According to the Confucianism, if we want to make ourselves prosperous, then we need to help the other country, the other people to be prosperous. When we want to make us strong, we also need to make the other people to be strong. I think that is a philosophy of China. As I mentioned, China certainly become increasingly important in terms of its economic weight. And China soon will become a high-income country. Certainly, we will have this kind of responsibility. Certainly, we want to be prosperous, and we want to grow more, but at the same time, unless our neighbors, people in the world, can also enjoy this kind of prosperity, but otherwise China cannot be prosperous by China itself.
Okay.
I think the Belt and Road Initiative is along the line of thinking. And certainly, when China go to a country to do the investment, as Mr. Gιακούνιν just mentioned, it's cooperations. We need to have a mutual agreement, right? It's an investment.
What's happening next? In the next 5 years, what can we expect of this initiative?
Well, certainly, if you look into the trend, because the Belt and Road Initiative has been welcomed by many countries like our Greece friend, and in Africa, in Central Asia, in Europe. And I do see, this kind of trend will be accelerated. We are going to see more projects in many other countries. And that's what should be good for all the countries, because we know the bottleneck for growth in most countries are infrastructure. And if we can have infrastructure connectivities, it will pave the foundation for every country to remove their bottleneck of growth, and maybe we have the opportunity to enjoy the common prosperity in the coming years.
Okay, let's come closer to our region. Let's go to the Middle East.
Okay, yeah.
Let's go to the issue and the tension between Israel and Russia lately. There is a tension lately because of Syria. What is next on the Israeli-Russian relation? We saw recently there is a tension for many regions in Syria. And
we have no intention.
Russia's decision to install the S-300 missiles in Syria increased the tension. What is your views?
I think that this is an unnecessary development. And on the other hand, I don't think that we should blow it out of its real proportions. Israel and Russia are not enemies, and we are not going to be enemies. I don't think that Russia has any particular agenda against Israel. I have known the president of Russia for many years. I've dealt with him, I negotiated with him, and I'm confident that Vladimir Putin doesn't have anything particular against Israel that should worry Israel. However, it is obvious that Russia is cooperating with enemies of the State of Israel, not because Russia has an agenda against Israel, because this is the interpretation of Russia, a legitimate interpretation of Russia, of what the Russian interests are in this part of the world. I think that the president of Russia is fully aware of the complexities and the sensitivities and the possible potential unnecessary developments which may arise out of this very sensitive situation, and it will be taken care of. I regret that Russia provided Syria with the S-300. At the time that I was prime minister and I negotiated with President Putin about it, he once said to me, why do you have to be afraid of the missiles? They are defensive missiles. So if your planes will not be above Damascus or above Latakia, which is the harbor city, you will not meet my missiles. But then a year later, when Russia was very upset with the potential deployment of American missiles on the border of Russia, in the Czech Republic and in Poland, and President Putin talked with me about it, I say to Mr. Putin, why are you concerned about the missiles? They are defensive missiles. If your planes will not be above Warsaw or above Prague, you will not meet the American missiles.
Okay,
And
let's look at the status quo. Let's look at the current situation here in the Middle East, especially in Syria. The United States' presence, influence is weakening. The
That's
presence of Russia is strengthening for Israel. What does that represent?
But again, I don't think that Russia is an enemy of Israel. So,
No, but the fact that the U.S. influence is weakening.
I regret the lack of balance, and that's what I said before. When you asked me about the general situation in the world, I said the lack of balance and the change of priorities amongst certain countries certainly influences the stability.
Can you elaborate on this? What changed? Who changed priorities in the
America.
Is it Washington that changed priorities?
Absolutely.
And what's the implications of that?
The implication is that America is becoming less influential in the Middle East and Russia is becoming more influential in the Middle East.
Maybe it's their decision.
Pardon?
Maybe it's Americans' decision.
No doubt about it. It certainly is American decision. They are pulling out their forces from the Middle East, and it does have an influence which it is quite noticeable. The problem that I have with the Russian influence, I am not afraid of any attempt by Russia that can jeopardize Israeli security, and I don't think that Russia has any such ideas.
Let's hear from...
Just a minute. The fact that Russia allowed a military presence of Iran in Syria is something that should have been avoided, and Israel will not acquiesce with it.
Okay.
And this is a source for unnecessary complexities that should be dismissed by pulling out Iran from where they don't belong.
Okay, Dr. Gιακούνιν, I know you don't see yourself as a representative of the Russian side of the opinion, but from being a Russian, do you agree with what Prime Minister just said about Russia's influence and the unnecessary moves or unnecessary changes?
I completely agree there with the Prime Minister saying there is no any kind of hostility between Russia and Israel. I would like to remind you that unlike in many Western countries, in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem even, you can see some kind of celebration of Victory Day on the 9th of May. And when in first time in 1995 I visited Israel, I was impressed that, on the corner of the street, there was a Russian-speaking person singing Katyusha. And that was in 1995. And I'm living with this impression.
In the city that I was the mayor of, in Jerusalem.
Listen, and I'm living with this impression. Of course, when we are talking about political games, political interests, it is absolutely absurd not to respect the interests of all the interested parties, if I may say so. And, when, for example, Mr. Trump declares, I don't know if you agree with me, that we transfer the capital of Israel to Jerusalem, forgetting about the resolution of the United Nations. That is causing problem. Of course, we can have it between Israel and Russia. We can have some arguments. We can differently see the situation. But that is not disbalancing the relations between Russia and Israel.
Okay, Prime Minister, you have to answer this. What do you think of the U.S.'s move to bring the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? Is that what the U.S.
I was the mayor of the city of Jerusalem for 10 years. And I always thought that it should have been recognized as the capital of the state of Israel. When Israel was declared, and it was declared the capital, every country is entitled to declare its capital. And Jerusalem was declared the capital of the state of Israel in December of 1949, and it should have been recognized by the international community. It is well known, and I've made it clear, has been discussed many times across the world, so I can say that I propose the Palestinians to recognize the Arab part of Jerusalem as the capital of the Palestinians. So from my point of view, the western part of Jerusalem is the natural capital of the state of Israel. The Arab part of Jerusalem is the natural capital of the Palestinian people. And I also proposed that the Holy Basin, which includes the old city of Jerusalem, which is very important for Christians, for Muslims, for Jews, and for many other religions, should be administered by an international trust made of the Saudis,
At this moment,
of Jordan,
is it still
of
possible?
Israel.
At this moment, is that scenario still possible given the U.S. policy in the Middle East?
They transfer the partial recognition. Let's put it in the right place. They moved the embassy to the western part of Jerusalem, and they say that the final borders of Jerusalem will be determined in negotiations. So this does not interfere or should not disturb a political process of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. I think that there is a peace plan which can be accepted. This is my peace plan. 2 weeks ago, I met with Dr. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian community in Paris, and he repeatedly said that we were very, very close to make an agreement on the basis of my plan, and I still think that it can be done today or tomorrow or in a month's time.
Mr. Prime Minister, did you like the way the America moved, did that move? It caused a lot of lives of the Palestinians. Don't you think that with the implications, it would have been a different way, it could be different ways to do that move in a different environment?
I sufficiently fight with my political rivals in Israel. Now you want me to...
No, I want you to say, because I know your opinions, I know that you disagree in a way, and I want your opinion.
Let's put it this way. As I said, I really... By the way, the transfer of the embassy to Jerusalem didn't cause the death of one person in Jerusalem, and not in the territories. There was not any major confrontation in Jerusalem. The confrontations were in Gaza, and the reactions were in Gaza. And Gaza
but it was something that was expected.
Pardon?
It was something that was expected.
Listen, Gaza is... Look, Gaza is controlled by a terrorist organization which is recognized as such by the international community. Hamas is a terrorist organization.
I think for
and
this
what they are
issue...
doing in Gaza has nothing to do with the transfer of the embassy.
Okay,
the transfer of the embassy is an issue, as I said. I am personally, and I have proposed it as Prime Minister of Israel, that Jerusalem, the Arab part of Jerusalem, will be the capital of the Palestinians. And I think that at the end of the day, this will be.
Okay, Prime Minister, we have to leave it there because this is not an exclusive discussion about Middle East.
But since we have the chance,
I know. But we do want.
Okay, of course, we want the opinion of the others.
I do want to get the view of Mr. Deputy Foreign Minister of Greece upon your policy in the Middle East. You are a member of the European Union, so you should side with the European position. However, your government is also a very close friend to the White House. In terms of the Iran deal, when President Trump decided to withdraw from that deal, what is the biggest question for you?
Look, if you asked me which is the most salient, the most constant, the most fundamental, I would say respect of international law and United Nations resolutions. So we want that for Cyprus. We want that in any part of the world. And I would like, to the previous discussion, to add that this is the solution also in Israel and the Palestine, two states. Recognition of the right to Israel to have safety and security in its own state, and simultaneously recognition to the Palestinians of the right to have their own state. And what worries me in the area is exactly that we have a weakening of the voices of peace that want this solution. Regarding our stance in the Middle East, we have never been a colonial power. We have always had diasporas integrated in all these countries of the area. And we want to have good solutions with our Arab friends and also with Israel, with which we have developed recently closer ties.
Yeah, when it comes to the Iran deal, actually I was talking about the Iran deal.
Iran is exactly a deal that should be respected, exactly because it has been forged after years of effort, and exactly because it's part of this multilateralism that we should defend.
Yeah, but this is not being respected, at least by the United States. I mean, the Iran deal, right?
We are trying as Europeans, not Greece is a small country, to play in this big game of interests.
Yeah.
But we contribute actively to what the European Union is trying to do, to build its own mechanism to neutralize the bad effects of this putting into question.
There are some analysts that argue, Mr. Gιακούνιν, that with the case of Syria, that Russia lately gains the control of the Middle East, and Americans at the same time losing control in the Middle East, and Americans play better ball, let's say, in the Balkans. Russia is decreasing its influence in the Balkans. What is your views?
I don't think this is a correct assumption that with Syrian deal, Russia won the control of the Mediterranean. It is just not relevant to say. I guess, you know, from this perspective, as a Russian citizen, what I can say, I know many people in different regions. I am traveling a lot. In Africa, there are a big community of former students from the Russian universities, right? In Israel, there is a great community of the people came from Russia, not only from China, Prime Minister, but from Russia also.
Actually, many more from Russia than from China.
Yes.
But my family came from China.
Okay.
But they were born in Russia.
Okay. Yeah. So
There's the connection.
You see, and you know, I suppose the move of Russia was generally met with respect. I will remind you, you know, the first time the world community suddenly understood that, you know, convoys coming from Syrian territory to Turkish territory, they were carrying illegal oil for the sale. We all know that nowadays, with sophisticated financial system, it is not possible for me to pay $1 without being, you know, controlled by appropriate bank, right? So how comes that, you know, only after the military planes of Russia destroyed the convoy, the entire world suddenly understood this. So that is kind of the feature of actual fighting terrorism, not trying to gain, you know, overwhelming control over Mediterranean. Firstly, it is not possible. Secondly, I don't believe that is the target.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move to...
Yeah, we have
There's one
many
thing
more.
must be still emphasized, and I think that we can't just leave this without saying it, that I don't disagree with the analysis of Professor Gιακούνιν about the role of Russia. Just one thing to remember. The president of Syria, which is supported by Russia, has killed more than 500,000 of his own citizens He butchered them. He killed them in Syria. This is unforgettable and unforgivable.
Okay.
Has to be remembered when we talk about this
Okay.
issue.
Professor Lin, you want to add something on this subject?
This is not my area of specialties,
Okay.
but it's very good to listen. From an academic perspective, we hope that peace and prosperity can be achieved. And the better way to achieve peace and prosperity is put the issue on the table and address the issue through diplomacy instead of war, fight, conflicts. And I hope those kind of rationality can prevail.
Yeah. Well, diplomatic ways, I wonder what's the definition of diplomatic ways? Do tariffs count as diplomatic ways? Because you're not using weapons.
It depends. Might be, in our times there are trade wars, there are other kind of wars, economic wars, sanctions. So let's go to the subject of the trade war between the United States.
Not shooting with weapons, but shooting with tariffs. That's why we want to talk about tariffs, trade tariffs.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why we want to talk a little bit about this issue
trade
here.
war between
I don't
the United
think that
States
this war will benefit any of the participants. And I think that soon enough they will understand that it's not the way to run the world economy.
Who should understand? Are you saying the U.S. or the Chinese?
Both U.S. and China, both of them.
But
will
China
understand.
believes it is the United States who
and
started this.
Look, China believes that this is the United States. The United States believes that China is exercising a lot of influence that gives China a certain advantage in the world trade. And they will have to come to an understanding. This war can't be won by anyone.
Yeah, but it seems that, I agree with you, it seems that both countries, and not only this, because there are implications for Europe, for all over the world, they are in a deadlock. It doesn't lead anywhere.
Look, it appears to be a deadlock. I hope that with sufficient wisdom, flexibility, and I may say compassion, both countries will ultimately come to terms, because, as I said, I think from, our side perspective, Israel is too small to be a big player in this war. I mean, we are not. We look at it, and I can say, no one can win this war. All of us can lose, by the way. All of us, not just China and America, but many others. And therefore, they will have to come to terms. And I believe they will come to terms, and it will be resolved in a manner which will be good enough for America, for China, and for those many millions of people in Africa and in the Middle East, which are greatly influenced by the economies and trade policy of these two countries.
Yeah. Professor Lin, but at this moment, we are not seeing any signs that the tensions are easing, right? We are seeing signs of the opposite direction. Does the Chinese leadership understand the rationale behind the U.S.'s behavior? Does the Chinese have a way out of this crisis, or suggestion to come out of this crisis?
Well, actually, U.S. has some problems. Trade deficit certainly is a problem. But the issue is that the trade deficit in the U.S. was caused by China or not. We need to understand that first. But actually, from all the academic studies, they agree the trade deficit in the U.S. is because U.S. consume too much, spend too much. And it's not because of China that causing the trade deficit in the U.S. And actually, certainly, if you look into the absolute amount of the U.S. trade deficit with China, seems to be very large. But the percentage of the U.S. trade deficit with China actually was declining in the past year first. And especially, U.S. always has some trade deficit with East Asian economies since the 1960s and so on. And in the height of 1980s, more than 100% of the U.S. trade deficit came from East Asian, because East Asian export those kind of more labor-intensive, low value-add
Right.
product
But
to
it
the
seems,
US
Professor
was a
Lin,
high-income country.
but it seems that the US is not mentioning the word trade deficit or the words trade deficit anymore. They're talking about China being an interference in the US political activity.
I thought that they were complaining about the Russians.
Yeah,
No,
but
no,
did
in
you?
politics.
But the most
Now
recent.
we are in easy position.
No, yesterday the headline was that Russia pales in comparison to China when it comes to meddling in the U.S. politics. So what are we looking at? Is it a comprehensive confrontation between the two sides?
So let's look into the realities. Certainly, the Trump mentioned that, and Vice President Pence mentioned that, but the head of the communication denies that. They say there's no evidence that China, meddling the U.S. election and so on. That's from their authorities. The person who are responsible for the communication in the U.S. deny that China intervened in the U.S. election.
Before we move to other set of questions, Mr. Katrougalos, on the trade war, what is the implications for the European countries?
Well, nobody is profiting from wars, trade wars included. And sometimes the in-betweens have more victims. For instance, I was looking at the forecast about the Greek maritime fleet. It may be influenced severely by the fall of international commerce if this trade war continues. But the more striking thing is another that we see in other sides of the European policy, a very weak European reply to that. Not a unified position because of different interests among the big countries in the European Union. And this reasserts our position as Greece that Europe must be much more proactive in the future.
And Dr. Gιακούνιν, how do you look at the trade war between China and the United States? Is this a symptom of a deeper problem with the world order we're looking at? The hegemony, the declining or relative decline of the US's hegemonic power compared to the rising China? Is that part of the equation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is not just, assumption that China intervened with some political processes in the United States of America. Professor Lin just mentioned, depth of the United States budget, but that entire model is a debt model. So we are talking about global perspective. This is not only the problem of the United States of America. This is not only the problem between China and the United States of America. That is exactly the problem of global economy. That's why, in the recent publications of Rome Club or Nobel laureate Stiglitz, both sources are saying that, the change is inevitable. The model should be changed. Mm-hmm. And, from this perspective, I suppose it is somehow not very professional to use, the assumption that, okay, China is rising, and because of that, China is acquiring some benefits from the trade relations with the United States of America. The problem is not that. The problem is that China is rising and rising much faster, and now it is competitive to the United States of America. And suddenly, the world sovereign, if I may say so, dominating power, somehow understood that, that is the challenge. We cannot behave like we behaved, many, many years before. Something changed.
Okay. Since we have you here, Dr. Gιακούνιν and Mr. Katrougalos, a word about the Greek-Russian relations.
Listen, you won't believe we were sitting in the chair waiting for this, performance, and we're talking about that. And, historically, we should remember that independent Greece occurred due to the, fighting of the Russian troops. And the first president of Greece, Mr. Kapodastri, he was on the service for the Russian Tsar. So from this and from the perspective of mutually, sharing orthodox beliefs, we are close nations. And, whatever politically wise we observe, that is the substance of the relations between two people and between two countries.
It's obvious that Russia is one of the countries with which we have friendly and long-lasting relationships. I would like just to repeat what our Prime Minister said to the similar question in Salonika, that recently we had some problems because we believe that mutual respect must reign even more in the relationships between friends, but now we are in a phase to overcome these difficulties.
Okay, I think we have to wrap it here. An hour goes by so fast. Many thanks to our distinguished panelists.
We could have discussed for hours about our issues.
The world is too big.
Okay.
But, many thanks once again to our four panelists, Mr. Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel, Dr. Vladimir Gιακούνιν, Chairman of the Supervisory Board of the Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute,
and Mr. Katrougalos, George Katrougalos, Deputy Foreign Minister of Greece, Mr. Lin, Professor Lin, thank you so much for being here, for having us, for give us the opportunity to have you here, and with your ideas to enlighten our discussion. Thank you so much, sir. And I want to thank you and CGTN for this excellent show.
Thank you, Fanny. Many thanks to our audience for following us. Thanks for watching.